And Jesus went out and departed from the temple. And his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Whoso readeth, let him understand.
From our Heavenly Father, in Yeshua's name. Whoso readeth, let him understand. So this quote that Jesus said is actually written in the Old Testament for us to read. And the quote that was spoken by Daniel the prophet is, when you shall see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place. The important part of this phrase is the holy place, because that's a specific arrival point for the Antichrist, or the abomination of desolation. When we look at this, the holy place is referring to the Temple Mount area. Especially when you read it in the Old Testament, the word used for holy place means the entire Temple Mount area. But when you look at Matthew 24:15 and you go back to Daniel 9:27 in the King James Version, you have a verse without the phrase, the holy place. It's just not there. Then we look to the Septuagint. The Brenton Septuagint is the only translation that has the phrase that was quoted by Jesus Christ. Now he said, whoso readeth, let him understand. So we're going to compare Daniel chapter 9 to Matthew 24 to see if it helps us understand Matthew 24 better. So there it is. The quote is in the Septuagint. Just like 90% of the quotes in the New Testament, King James Version, are quoting from the Septuagint, Old Testament version. So if you start at verse 1, let's take verse 1. Verse 1 in Matthew 24, scene 1 is the temple. So here we have the temple. It's in all its beauty, as I showed in the intro of the video. It's the symbol of the salvation covenant. And the people of that day admired it and knew that God was going to save them because they could see that building. And we also have the salvation covenant referenced in Daniel 9:4. Daniel said, And I prayed unto the Lord my God, and made my confession, and said, O Lord, the great and dreadful God, keeping the covenant, and mercy to them that love him, and to them that keep his commandments. So the covenant is not the temple, but it was a symbol of the covenant back in that day. Daniel knew that God was going to save his people, and that's what Daniel chapter 9 was, the prayer to save the people. Scene 2 is 70 AD, the prince. So in Daniel 9:26, we clearly have the people of the prince shall come and destroy the city. That's the Roman general Titus and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Now this translation is the King James translation. But it gets it done when you're looking to see the Roman army destroying the sanctuary. Now, does Jesus reference this in Matthew 24? In fact, he does. So we're going to look at that in the next slide. 24:7, we have Jesus Christ telling us that nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And so we have the prediction that the temple is going to be destroyed, and that wars and famines and pestilences and earthquakes, basically the passage of time. So we're going to compare this to what is written in the book of Daniel. So in Daniel 9:26, it talks about how the city is going to be despoiled and the holy place in Daniel 9:26. So this is the same wars and rumors of wars, and there will be war upon war. Now, the next section is going to be "it shall recover." This is a special phrase only in the Septuagint. What the "it" is the salvation covenant. In the first part of Daniel 9:27 in the Septuagint, the subject is the covenant, which is what Daniel was praying about in Daniel chapter 9, verse 4. He says, "Oh God, you are the keeper of the covenant." So he closes the chapter with the same subjects he began the chapter with, which was what he was praying about. He was praying about the salvation of the people. So in verse 27, we have the continuation of the same subject. And so this is why the Septuagint is so much more important than the King James in this case, because the subject is carried over into the last verse, as it should be. And the covenant will be made strong. What covenant is that? That is the salvation covenant that Jesus Christ made on the cross. That's the new covenant. And the old covenant is the old one that was symbolized by the temple and through the temple practices. So that will be made strong for many, and it will recover again. So recovering from what? From the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So the people admired the temple. They knew that God was going to save them as long as that temple stood. But the temple was destroyed, and Jesus was telling us it's going to be destroyed, but the gospel is going to be spread throughout all the earth. So it will recover. So he says that in Matthew 24. About how the temple is like a symbol for the salvation covenant of the old covenant of the people. And Jesus talks about how in Matthew 24, how the salvation covenant or the temple itself is going to be destroyed. It also talks about in Luke 21 that and as some spake of the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts, he said, "As for these things which you behold," that's everything in the temple. Every procedure, every ordinance, every tool that they had, all of it is going to be removed. Don't need any temple ordinances at all. No sacrifices, no more blood. He was the one-time sacrifice for all time. The days will come in which there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And so this is the replacement of the old covenant, the cross itself. The cross being the symbol of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice for us once and for all, nailing all the temple ordinances to the cross. And that's why Jesus told us in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, you're not going to need that temple anymore. So don't be sad when it's thrown down. And so this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world. So this brings us back to Daniel 9:27, that the salvation covenant will recover. It's recovering from the destruction of the temple. And it's basically the gospel is the new temple, and the heart and the people who believe the gospel and believe on Jesus Christ. They are the new temple made without hands. This covenant, in Daniel 9:27, it says, it will be made strong for many and it will recover. So you start at 70 AD when everything is destroyed, and you end up in our era when we have the gospel having been spread throughout all the earth. So here we have a mirror between Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 and what Christ was teaching in Matthew 24, which he said, whoso readeth, let him understand. So if you can read what the words that Jesus Christ quoted, then you can understand what happened in the time being between 70 AD and our modern era. 4 is wars and rumors of wars. It's in Matthew 24 verse 7. So I like to say 24/7 wars and rumors of wars. This is what Jesus painted that would happen from basically after he died on the cross and rose again, all the way to 70 AD and all the way to today, 24/7. So here we have, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. In Daniel 9:26, you see in the Septuagint, the very last phrase, it says, there will be war upon war. And it kind of says that in the King James, it's just a little less clear. So I like to use the Septuagint for clarity. But basically, Jesus is using the Septuagint translation to base Matthew 24 as he gives us the explanation of the temple and the salvation covenant and what is going to happen to that covenant. We have the wars and rumors of wars in the eons of time since 70 AD, 24/7. Wars and rumors of wars. And in the Septuagint, we have the same phrasing. There will be war upon war in Daniel 9:26. And then in Daniel 9:27, it says, at the completion of the period of 7, the abomination of desolation will stand in the holy place. And it is only written in the Septuagint version, which Jesus said, whoso reads that version, the words that I said, will understand. So scene 5 is the gospel being preached. The gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. The gospel is the salvation message. And that salvation message is what Daniel prayed for. It was the subject of the chapter of Daniel. And at the end, he says the covenant shall grow in strength. And we're going to look at that. This is part C of Daniel 9:27 in the Septuagint. It's a very long verse. A lot was cut out. So during the set time of the consummation of war, so basically, when all the wars upon wars are ended, then the desolation will be taken away when the covenant prevails for many weeks. So what we have here described is that the covenant is something that happens over a long period of time, many weeks. In the context of Daniel 9, we know that 70 weeks is 490 years, so it's probably many of those periods. And so that tells us that the subject of the covenant is what the entire verse is discussing. So we also have this long period of time here being described by Jesus in Matthew 24. The gospel of the kingdom shall be preached. That's this time when the covenant prevails for many weeks. And the last part is the sudden arrival. Jesus describes a sudden arrival of the abomination of desolation, which is also the Antichrist. Matthew 24:15, again, he says, when you shall see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. The only way to understand this verse is to read it, the verse that Jesus was quoting from. And it says, and at the completion of the period of 7, offering and drink offering will be taken away. Now, this offering is not a blood offering. This isn't the sacrifice for sin. These are the offerings that we give as gifts of love and thanks and thanksgiving to the Lord God Almighty. But when you have the abomination standing in the holy place, and upon the holy place there will be an abomination of desolation until the end. So he comes at the end of a period of 7. We are told when he comes and where he comes. And this gives us a very distinct picture that it's a sudden thing. And Jesus also says in Matthew 24 how it is a sudden arrival. So in Daniel 9:27, it says, at the completion of the period of 7. So what is this period of 7? Well, it could be two things. It could be the 7 periods of 70 weeks. That's 3,430 years. Or it could be the 7th, 70th week, which is 7 years long. Either way, you have the completion of the period of 7. And this answers also what happens over this long period of time. We have wars and rumors of wars all the way up until his arrival, the sudden arrival that Jesus is speaking of. Not behind the scenes, not being sneaky, but a sudden jar. He's given the location of where he's going to stand up and basically when. So we have a final period of 7 that the Septuagint is referring to here. And the Septuagint says at the end of, or the completion of a period of 7 is when this abomination of desolation is going to arrive. So up until then, we have wars and rumors of wars, or 24/7 wars and rumors of wars. In Daniel 9:27 in the Septuagint, at the completion of the period of 7, so basically we have a final 7 years here at the end of time. Now, this does not start with a peace treaty, because that comes from the King James Version that changes the subject and divides the 7 years in half, saying that Satan arrives in the half, when the Septuagint says he clearly arrives at the completion of the period of 7. So we're going to have wars and rumors of wars all the way up until the sudden arrival. What we have here is a lot of speculation because of the King James translation, which leaves out over half of the verse. Now the King James translation was changed by Rabbi Akiba in the 1st century, and it was documented in the book, which is a Jewish commentary called the Seder Olam. And in that book, it was documented that they changed the messianic prophecies. So when they did this, many people think the covenant means it's going to be a treaty, although the word has nothing to do with the treaty and not used for treaty at all. It's used for only the covenant between God and man. So many people put a peace treaty at the beginning of the 7-year period, and then when you shorten the time, because Jesus Christ said the time was shortened, many people put that same activity at the beginning of a 5-month period. But this is not the case. In the Septuagint, there is no peace treaty. The subject was changed from the Septuagint, which was the covenant. It was the salvation covenant that Christ made in 33 AD. So it does not belong here at the beginning of the 7 years. The salvation covenant is the subject of Daniel 9:27. It will recover, and the gospel will be preached as it is written in Matthew 24. And then at the end, the completion of the period of 7, you have his sudden arrival. So you don't have him arriving in the midst of the week, according to the Septuagint. So what do we have to do then? What would go here at the beginning of the last 7 years? Or as a pattern, what would go here at the beginning of the 5 months? Well, it would be Matthew 24 verse 7. Jesus Christ said there's going to be wars and rumors of wars right up until a sudden arrival of the abomination of desolation. So that would also mirror what's going to happen in the 5-month period, which it is written that the angels in the bottomless pit, Lucifer or Satan is the king of the bottomless pit. He is the king of those angels, or the locust army. And he's given a key, and he used a key to open a lock. He's going to open the lock, and they're going to come out of the pit. But they're going to be raging and running like battle horses to the battle. And they're going to the war in heaven. And so that mirrors what's still happening on earth ever since 70 AD. Now, the 1290 days spoken of in Daniel chapter 12, I think originally was in the first part of the 7 years. And the second part of the 7 years was going to be Satan's time, which is written, Daniel 12, verse 7, and Daniel 7, verse 25, and Revelation 12, verse 14. He's given a time times and a half a time. So we have a threefold confirmation that this is Satan's time. But it was never quantified. It was never given a quantity of 3.5 years, which makes it flexible. And when God shortened the time, he can easily shorten it to half of the 5-month period. So here we have the shortening, and here we have the Septuagint after the completion of 7. So the Septuagint is telling us after the completion of a period of 7, which is probably 7 years, that is when Satan is going to have his little moment, which was shortened to 2.5 months, just to fit that same pattern, which means the 1290 days, which was the prep work leading up to his arrival, because it says in Daniel 12:11 that the abomination of desolation will be set up at the end of this 1290 days. So we still have the 1290 days, we still have the 7 years. None of this time was shortened. Time itself was not shortened, but the time that Antichrist or Satan will receive has been shortened to that 2.5 month period, according to Revelation 8, verse 1. And this matches the war in heaven and the wars and rumors of wars. So looking for a peace treaty is in error. What we need to look for is in Daniel 12:11, when the 1290 days begins. What is that event? And all the other 42-month periods in Revelation, there are 4 of them. And we need to look and see what each of them characterize to see what's going to begin that last 3.5 year period before his arrival, according to the book of Daniel. So the last 5 months, it seems that woe number 1 is the war in heaven, because the locust army has been let out of the pit. And when they go to heaven to war God, to take over heaven, they are told you have 5 months. And that is why when Satan is cast out in the middle to the earth, it is woe number 2. Because now we have war on earth. We have war in heaven for woe number 1. And he knows, it's recorded in Revelation chapter 12, that he knows he has a short time. How does he know that? Because in the 5th trump, God told him, you've got 5 months to sting people on earth. But he wastes it and tries to take over heaven. So in Matthew 24, we return to the Christ warning us that this event is so sudden that you don't even have time to get things out of your house. There is not a 2.5 month period here where you can lollygag and walk around and gather supplies, go back, get your wardrobe, pack your bags, get ready. No, the arrival is so sudden, you do not have time to take anything, not anything, out of your house. But we don't have to worry. As it is written in Luke 10:1, we don't have to worry because the Lord appointed other 70 also and sent them 2 and 2 before his face into every city and place, whither he himself would come. And it's interesting because he also sent us his word, and he said, whoso readeth, let him understand. Let him understand, as it is written in the book of the 70, the Septuagint, that when we go out as witnesses, we don't have to worry about taking anything. So I think this is a testament to the Septuagint, because the Lord appointed other 70 and sent them out 2 and 2 before his face into every city and place, whither he himself would come. Go your ways, behold, I send you forth as lambs among the wolves. Carry neither purse, nor scrip, nor shoes, and salute no man by the way. So we should always prepare for hard times in your home and in your family. Always have supplies and extra if you have the money to get those things. But we don't have to worry, because the Lord's going to be there for us to provide all the things that we need in this time, especially during this last 2.5 months when Satan and his angels are cast out. If you note in the 5th trump, only a star single is cast out with the key to the bottomless pit. So the angels are not cast out at this point, and there is no one world order. There's no peace treaty. There is no activity on the earth at this point. It is all in heaven and in another dimension. And then they go up to heaven to war God himself. And they know they have 5 months. They think they can actually take over God, which is the most appalling part of it all. But we do not have to worry, because the Lord has our back, and we don't have to worry to go get the clothes or get anything, because when Satan arrives in the midst of this 5 months, and he is cast to the earth with his angels, as it is written, he is cast with his angels to the earth. It says, woe to those who are on the earth, because now we have to face the false Christ and all his deceptiveness. So that is how Jesus preaches the message of Daniel in Matthew 24, focusing on that temple and bringing us to the point of not depending on that physical image of the temple as the way to salvation, but that it's all inward now, and the gospel is written in our hearts and our minds. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much.